My name is Isaac Stern. This story is about Jan Peerce, a great singer and a good friend. Proud, passionate, witty. Whether he was singing Rigoletto at the Metropolitan Opera House or recording his enormous hit, The Bluebird of Happiness, he always sang from the heart. One of the most popular entertainers of this century, Jan Peerce was loved throughout the world, but only after he paid his dues. With relatively no training and very few professional contacts, his career got off to a slow start. Many managers dismissed him because he did not fit the perceived mold of the romantic tenor. It was true, one could hardly call Jan Peerce tall, dark, and handsome. In 1971, he starred in the role of Tevye, the father figure in Sholem Aleichem's The Fiddler on the Roof. As many have said of Jan Peerce, in some ways, he was Tevye. Like Tevye, he was a simple family man. He was devoted to his wife, Alice, who was his representative and his constant and faithful companion for more than 50 years. They raised 3 children, Larry, Joy, and Susan. And like Tevye, Jan's roots were in the Russian village familiarly called the shtetl. And like Tevye, Jan spoke directly to God. In that way, he touched everyone, whether it was the man in the street or the connoisseur at the opera. Jan and I shared many beginnings as artists. We both started as violinists. We both had the same manager, the legendary Saul Hurok, a unique character who was very close to us personally. And we both shared a passion for Carnegie Hall. Jan brought his art to the stage of Carnegie many times. In what turned out to be his last appearance was January 21st, 1982. He turned once again to the character of Tevye.
And we were told when Jerome Robbins did the choreography and we came in, every Tevye had to pass muster with him. So the first thing he said, remember, if you got something to say to God, there he is in the second balcony. And he put a red light at the Broadway Theater. And we'd look up there and every time, yeah, there's God. And you know, in this case, he said, I'm not really complaining. After all, with your help, I'm starving to death. You made many poor people. I realize, of course, it's no shame to be poor, but it's no great honor either. What would have been so terrible if I had a small fortune? If I were a rich man, all day long, a if I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work hard. If I were a bitty rich diddle man.
Jan Peerce's mother and father, Louis and Henya Perelmuth, met and married in the Russian village of Horodets. They had a daughter who died as a baby in an epidemic in Russia. In 1903, they came to America with their firstborn son, Motel, seeking a new life in a new land. A year later, their second son, Jacob Pincus, later to be known as Jan Peerce, was born on June 3rd, 1904, in the family's tiny walk-up flat on Orchard Street on New York's Lower East Side. He was nicknamed Pinky by his neighborhood friends. When Pinky was 3 and Motel was 6, Motel was killed on Madison Street, hitching a ride on an ice wagon. Motel's death left Pinky as the oldest son, the one who would have to fulfill his mother's dream to have a doctor in the family. Louis, his father, had trouble getting started like so many immigrants who came to America at the turn of the century. But he did find work in the sweatshops. Jan Peerce remembered his father telling him, "Back when I came to America, you could get a good meal in a restaurant on Essex Street for 6 cents. But the trick was, where did you get those 6 cents? Kenya, his mother, had always dreamed of playing the violin herself. In her little town of Horodiec, music was a way of life. Her family was too poor, though, to afford lessons, even from a fiddler on the roof. In the new world, she expected something different from her child. She insisted that he grow up on speaking terms with a musical instrument.
In my case, and I say it with all humility, the violin had something to do with me. Mm-hmm. It gave me the love and the desire to produce tones and not just sound.
To spin out a line, then.
Exactly. The word legato has always played a great interest to this day. My right arm has always been working for me subconsciously. But for the violin, for some reason in my case, I've always wanted to sing and always wanted to produce something which I hoped was beautiful.
Il mio tesoro intanto, andate, andate a consolar, ed a cirio e pianto, cercate di asciugar, cercate di asciugar, cercate di asciugar. Ditele che quei torti a vendicare io vado, a vendicar io vado, che soldi, stragi e morti non giovani a tornar, non giovani a tornar, che soldi, stragi e morti non giovani a tornar, non giovani a tornar.
Jan Peerce had his first chance to sing in his father's synagogue on Henry Street, which was founded by the immigrants from Horodiec. Cantorial music, whose roots lie in both Oriental chant and Western harmony, flowered in the synagogues of Eastern Europe. The cantorial traditions and the names of its singers spread far beyond the ghettos and the villages.
When you're speaking of singing, you're always speaking in terms of your singing as a concert artist, an opera and recital. You have not spoken of your wanting to be a singer as a cantor. How did you come to be a cantor? And what made you decide to be a cantor? And what was the crossing point from one to the other?
I didn't start as a cantor. I started as an altar boy, as a choir boy. In Hebrew you say a meshorer. And I sang with every great cantor who arrived in New York from the, let's say, from 1912, 1913 to this day. As a youngster, I'd come home after a service with one of the great cantors, and let's say in the Attorney Street Synagogue on the east side, or on Norfolk Street, I'd come home and stand in my dining room on Madison Street, in my little apartment there, and look in the mirror, which hung on the wall, and I would imitate the man I had just done a service with.
In 1913, for the Jewish New Year observance in the Henry Street Synagogue, the 9-year-old boy was assigned a small alto role which says, "From the earth we came, and to the earth we return." When it was over, the elder of the synagogue, Reb Shepsel, broke tradition. He left his seat of honor by the eastern wall, came to the boy standing at the altar, and kissed him on both cheeks.
So no matter what I accomplished, no matter what I did, no matter what concert, what performance, my father, who was a very wise man, who wasn't a foolish man, but to him, he would always bring up, "This is great, but I remember when Reb Shepsel kissed you on both cheeks."
Baruch ato ad Hashem.
I knew my Hebrew, I knew my text, I knew the feeling, because my father would sit down and you tell him the meaning. If it was, Odom, you say to me up, or you gotta...
But how did you learn the cantillations?
By hearing. We sang scores, but listen to the cantor. You know, some kids, when they stand at an altar, choir boys, they play with the with their tzitzis. No, some listen.
For his bar mitzvah in 1917, instead of making the usual speech, the young boy performed the morning service as the cantor.
You had to learn the words in the lieder, exactly what they meant. You had to, in the Cantorial style, know exactly what was being said
Oh, you
there.
better know.
Therefore, that too was a training
You are called
ground.
the messenger of the people. You're a shaliach tzibur. You're the representative. And you know whom you're
And
talking
therefore,
to.
that's right.
And he understands Hebrew. And he knows what you're saying.
Jan and Alice Peerce, the child
When
of
Edward R. Murrow
and the
visited
youngest
Jan
of
and
the three
Alice in
children
their home
live in
for
this
his television
Tudor-style
show,
house in New
Person to
Rochelle, New
Person,
York.
Jan remembered his
for
first
15
public
years.
appearance
Good evening, Alice.
outside the synagogue.
Evening, Ed.
Evening, Jan.
Good evening, Ed.
What's the earliest Jan Peerce performance you can remember?
Say, I could take you back a long way. How far back do you want me to go? Shall I go as far as my childhood?
Right to the beginning.
Beginning?
Yes.
Well, you know, I used to belong, on the east side, I used to belong to a wonderful settlement house called the Madison House Settlement. And they used to send us to camp for 2 weeks. And it was in that Camp Felicia that I went to year in and year out. And the first year that I was there, I must have been 9 or 9.5 years of age, when they had a contest. And believe it or not, I won that contest. And I'd like to tell you, incidentally, I got a wonderful prize. I got a box of candy as my prize. And I'd like to sing just a couple of bars of the melody that I did.
This was the winning number, right?
Huh? Yes.
Jack-o'-lantern in the lilac tree dances, perfume from the garden wall entrances. La da 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 da, la da 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 da.
We owe you several boxes of chocolates.
And
for
let
that.
me tell you my favorite brand, young man.
All right.
To what degree do you feel that your singing as a cantor, that open style of singing, reflected healthily in your work later on, or did it not?
You know, to sing, whether you sing as a cantor if you sing opera, is not a great difference. There's a difference in the language. There's a difference, not even in the emotion. Because if you sing of love, and you sing towards a girl, and you sing of love towards God, there must be the same intensity.
70 years after his debut at Camp Felicia, Jan Peerce is recording at the Jerusalem Music Center with conductor Mendy Rodan and the Beersheba Chamber Orchestra. He sings Verdi's Questa o Quella from Rigoletto.
Di questa mi torna in vita, forse un'altra, domani sarà un'altra, forse un'altra, domani sarà. La costanza.
At the time, he told the New York Times, "I sing as well as, if not better, than I did 25 years ago. There is no relation between good singing and age. The important thing is to have a foundation in vocal art. You learn that you don't waste your principle. You sing off your interest." The critic Louis Biancoli commented, "His voice, though it has darkened slightly and gained in richness, sounds as fresh as it did at his debut." Jan Peerce is one of our 7 wonders of music.
So I began to sing, and then came my mutation period. After 14 and a half, the voice changed. And all of a sudden, at the age of 17 or so, I began to hum. I began to find that tones were being emitted.
Pinky Perlmuth did well at DeWitt Clinton High School, but he never took his final exams and did not graduate. He attended courses at Columbia University, but exhibited no desire for higher education. Every degree, every credit, he thought, would lead him further down the road to his mother's vision of her son as Dr. Jacob Pincus Perlmuth. But he had music in his heart, and music in his soul, and a girl named Alice on his mind.
Jan asked me to marry him, and I said no. One of the reasons was that he was not doing well at school. Secondly, I was fearful that his mother would put the responsibility upon me or the blame upon me for his not becoming a doctor. And the third reason was that my parents did not want me to marry Jan.
They eventually did marry. They eloped after a secret wedding in 1928.
I married him. I loved him. And he was the first person, the first boy that ever kissed me. Secondly, he had such charm. He could charm anybody and anyone all his life.
Jan played the violin in a combo he founded called Pinky Pearl and his Dance Band. They worked the Borscht Belt for 14 summers. Alice knew his voice had far greater potential than his violin, but they found the going tough. Whatever money he and Alice had left over, she insisted he spend on voice lessons.
I began to sing around, and people began to talk. Tenor, young tenor. Not only in the synagogue, in conjunction with my violin playing, I began to sing with the little orchestras. I worked at the Astor Hotel, where I did some singing. I became the chorus singer, you know, for the dance music. And we do little concerts, and I'd sing a little number that I memorized and learned. And at one of the dinners in 1932, there was a big dinner being given in honor of Weber and Fields. Remember them? They were great comedians, and this was their 50th anniversary. So everybody in show business was there, including a man by the name of Roxy, Samuel L. Rutherford.
The turning point came in 1932. Samuel Roxy Rothfeld, the famous showman for whom the Roxy Theater was named, heard the young man sing and asked to see him the next day.
And I went to see him that Tuesday at the Palace Theater building, and the first question he asked me is, what are you doing with the fiddle in your hand? Why are you playing violin? I said, I have to earn a livelihood. But he said, do you realize you have something in your throat? You have a beautiful voice. I said, people have been telling me I have a nice voice, but I can't get anywhere.
Jan Peerce was signed to sing on a radio program broadcast from Roxy's newest and largest theater, the Radio City Music Hall. But the conductor, Erno Rapé, was unimpressed with the kid from the Catskills.
And in front of the orchestra, he said, you'll never make it. What are you doing here? He said, go back to play your weddings and bar mitzvahs and dances. You're a nice boy, but, well, this was enough to kill me in front of a 100-piece orchestra.
Not until Rapé had heard Jan sing the only opera aria he then knew, La Donna Immobile, from Rigoletto, did the conductor know that Jan had a great voice.
And as I was waiting at the door, many of the musicians who didn't know me said, sorry, kid, sorry. Each one had a word of sympathy for me. Finally, he came in and he said to Rapé, he said, look, let him sing something, and let him sing an aria for you. If he sings an aria, what kind of an aria? Let him sing La Donna Immobile for you. So when I sang it, sang to be natural. So why don't you tell me? You sing it tomorrow. And from that day on, we became friends.
Jan was contracted to appear in the elaborate variety show designed for the opening of Radio City Music Hall. He was heartbroken when his debut was canceled due to problems in the show. As a concession, Jan was allowed to sing at intermissions, but only from behind the curtain. He became known as the Phantom Voice. But his notoriety grew until, finally, the music hall audience got to see the chubby, bespectacled man who belonged to that beautiful voice. Jan remained at the music hall for 8 years, singing everything from opera arias to the popular tunes of the day. From the vaudeville stage to the nightclub circuit to the movie set, Jan Peerce became a star. He was billed with the top acts of the 1930s. A popular vaudeville movie of the day featured the Three DeLovellys, the Cotton Club Tramp Band, and Jan Peerce.
I used to be an opera star, as you can plainly tell. I sang O Paradiso, and I did it very well. I used to sing in Frankfurt, now it's Frankfurters I sell. Ah, me, I must be going to the door. When I sang Martha, they used to stand and cheer for hours. The stage was always filled with flowers. When I started to study, and I went from one teacher to another, you know, I think the same is true in the violin. If you don't learn with the teacher, go to somebody else. If you don't improve, go. And I, luckily by instinct, and my wife, Alice, who was always close to me to this day, she also said, look, you're not learning, try somebody else. So when I had to study some German Lieder, I went to a man by the name of Leo Braun.
Oh.
Remember Leo Braun?
But you know what, at first I thought he was crazy. He had his studio in the old Metropolitan building, Metropolitan Opera building. He would make you study the song as a poem. I said, leave me alone, I don't want to. No, 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 you come and do the way I ask you, otherwise I don't need you or your money. And I would get up there and he'd put me in a corner of the room and he'd make you recite with gestures. And he would stop you and your umlaut is no good, your pronunciation is good, you're not phrasing correctly, what is it with you? And he'd yell and scream. But he was right.
Absolutely.
And whatever I studied with him,
That's
whatever I
wonderful.
learned with him, to this day, I've remembered. There was
In a master class at the Jerusalem Music Center,
between both of you.
Jan is
And
passing
she
on
lost
to
her
a new
information.
generation of singers
Not terribly,
that knowledge
It-
he
it
has
wasn't
gained
in the-
from
in
his
the proper
teachers.
vein. You know what I'm talking about? Also, please, you're a beautiful lady, you're a beautiful girl. Your expression must change. When you say something about love, you must look as if you love. And if you say something which is not love, you must, in other words, you can't have the same expression all the time, you know? And say something.
His advice to young singers: remember that a career in music is one of work and, to a large extent, self-forgetfulness. It is the music which is important, not the person. If anyone is thinking of entering the music field because he wants fame and glory, he'd better try another profession. There is no shortcut to musical success.
Bravo. That's very good, very beautiful. Let me tell you something. To sing lyrically is beautiful, but you must have a more effort to sing lyrically and softly than the high notes. If you have high notes, they come. You open your mouth and boom, they're there.
Speaking of singing, what is it that is basically necessary to keep a voice focused, clear, under control, with no breaks in the registers, it goes up or down, over a long period of time?
It's very simple. There are no tricks involved. You know, taking care of a voice is like bringing you back to normal. Going to a teacher to study voice, there are no tricks involved. The teacher must know that you're cognizant of the fact that you have a diaphragm and that there's a purpose, that God put a diaphragm in a human body to serve a purpose. Also, if you let your diaphragm and your resonance chambers do the work that they're supposed to do, all you're doing is burning energy. You're not getting tired like playing the fiddle. When you play, and you play for hours, and we've known each other for years, and you play so gorgeously, always, you know that you don't get tired when you play. You use your wrist and your hand and the flexibility of your fingers, and you're burning energy all the time. And the same is true with me.
One of the most beautiful popular melodies of the day, sung by one of radio's finest voices, Mr. Jan Peerce singing Love Came Out of the Night.
Radio City might seem an unlikely route to the world of classical music, but it was through the music hall radio broadcasts that Jan came to the attention of Maestro Arturo Toscanini, who, upon hearing the tenor, was impressed enough to give him an audition.
Toscanini heard me on one of those Sunday broadcasts, and he arranged the audition at the Astor Hotel. So he says, what do you know? So the first hour... No. First hour that came to my mind was Una Furtiva Lagrima. You sing that? He sat down at the piano, and he wasn't a great pianist. And he began to play, and he made a mistake. But I kept going. I didn't stop. And I'll never forget, began to snow, and all I could do was concentrate on the flakes of snow, and I said, we'll catch up with each other. Sure enough, when it came to the interlude for the second part, we finished, and that's when he booked me immediately, and from that time on, started a wonderful friendship, musical friendship besides personal, and I was with him for 15 years.
Toscanini realized that he had found his tenor. On 14 occasions, Toscanini chose Jan Peerce as his tenor soloist in La Bohème, La Traviata, Fidelio, and Ballo in Maschera, and Rigoletto, among others. Many of these historic performances were recorded and serve as a legacy of this close relationship between singer and conductor.
You know, he'd come to our home for dinner, And Alice is a wonderful cook, and one day she prepared little knishes, liver knishes. And although he wasn't allowed to eat, he was always on a sort of a light diet, he began to eat with both hands, and he said, "Oh, what a great Italian dish this is." And I corrected him. I said, "Maestro, this is not an Italian dish." "Oh, no," he says, "it is Italian." I said, "No, it's not. It's a Jewish-Russian dish." He said, "It must be Italian." I said, "Why do you say it must be Italian?" He said, "It is so good that it must be Italian."
As part of Toscanini's anti-fascist crusade, Jan Peerce was chosen to sing in the 1943 film Hymn of the Nations. Verdi's score had been written for Garibaldi Day to honor Italy's struggle against foreign domination. Toscanini, the son of a soldier under Garibaldi, conducted Jan Peerce, the son of Russian immigrants, who expresses to a world at war Verdi's themes of liberty and freedom.
Una migrante schiera di navi remigar per l'acque degli ampi oceani ed affollarsi tutte verso il magico tempio ed in quel tempio spargere a mille portentosi miracoli del genio. E fu più un giorno che passò furiando quel bieco fantasma della guerra. Allora udissi un cozzar d'armi, un saettar di spade, un tempestar di carri e di corsieri, un grido di trionfo e un urlante eccola ove fumò di sangue il campo di battaglia, un luttuoso campo santo a levarsi e una regia di preghiere, di pianti e di
I was too heavy for light work. I was too light for heavy work. The Broadway people said I belong in the opera. The operatic people said I belong on Broadway. This one said the musical. The other one said go down to the Jefferson Theater, go into the mountains, play with an orchestra, sing in Lakewood. You know, everybody had a job somewhere else for me. But when he sort of put a stamp on me, people began to say, "Hey, wait a minute." And then I began to sing. So that prompted me becoming very serious about the opera.
In 1938, Jan Peerce made his operatic debut as the Duke in Verdi's Rigoletto with the Columbia Opera Company. At first, he turned the opportunity down because he was ashamed of how he'd look in red tights. But with a Sir Francis Drake collar, pointed beard, and mustache, even Jan realized that perhaps he was quite dashing after all. One local critic remarked of Jan's otherwise unnoticed debut, opera would seem to be his happy hunting ground.
You know, my affiliation with Toscanini was a great one, not only because of what he did for me in honoring me, but what he taught me. And his favorite expression to all his singers, he would strive, he was a stickler for words. Parole, parole, parole. He used to say the word, the tone will come.
Diction.
Diction, and the tone will come. How true. And no matter if you're singing in Italian, French, Yiddish, English.
And on the violin, it's called articulation. Every note shall be articulated.
I was hoping you'd say something.
It's exactly that.
Day impollenti spiriti, il giovanile ardore.
This aria from La Traviata always meant a great deal to Jan. He made his debut at the Met in the role of Alfredo in La Traviata. It was also the first opera that he recorded with Toscanini.
Dal dì che disse vivere, io voglio te fedel, all'universo i vorrei, io vivo quasi in ciel, dal dì che disse vivere, io voglio a te fedel. Ah sì, dell'universo in amore io vivo quasi in ciel, io vivo in ciel, dell'universo in memore, io vivo quasi in cielo, sì, io vivo quasi in cielo, io vivo quasi in cielo.
The doors of the Metropolitan Opera House opened to Jan in 1941 when the Met's leading tenor, Tito Schipa, chose to return to fascist Italy. Jan's contract guaranteed him no less than 5 principal roles per season. The boy alto who wanted to be a cantor had grown up to become one of opera's leading tenors.
And I'll never forget, I did my audition at the Met, and I think I'm the only man who ever did an audition at the Met who did an encore at an audition. They said, Mr. Peerce, do you know the tenor part of Rigoletto? I said, sure. Can you sing the Questa Quella for us? Sure. And Werner Bass, who was my accompanist at the time, he played and sang it. Can you sing for us just the tenor part of the duet of the second act, El Sol dell'Anima? Sure. Sang it. But to be flat, so not finished. How about Parmi vede le lagrime? Oh, yeah, sure. Sang it. And how about La Donna Immobile? Sang it. And how about the tenor part of the quartet? Sang it. Do you know Una furtiva lagrima?
Oh.
Sure. Sang it for them. I said, may I go now? No, just a moment, please. If you're not too tired, could you repeat Una furtiva lagrima? So I said to my accompanist, to Warner, I said, you know, this is the first time that a guy has to do an encore. And I sang it for them again. When I got through, there was Jurek. He was there at the audition, of course. He came running out to me on stage, and he said, put his arms around me, and he said, you know something? It's a Friday. Go home. Wish you a good Shabbos. Make kiddush, eat gefilte fish. You remember the Metropolitan Opera.
On November 29, 1941, when Jan Peerce made his Metropolitan Opera debut, a music critic proclaimed him the all-American successor to the greats of opera's almost extinct golden age. Not only did Mr. Peerce sing well, observed Jerome D. Boehm of the New York Herald Tribune, but more surprisingly, he acted well, too. I'll never forget him as Alfredo in La Traviata. As the Duke in Rigoletto. Los Cavaradossi in Tosca. As Rodolfo in La Bohème. and in many other leading roles. With the Met, he sang 205 performances in 11 operas, as well as 119 performances on tour.
Now, every opera star we've ever had on stage agrees that you've never heard Vesta la Juba sung until Jan Peerce has sung it for you. Let's have a wonderfully warm reception for Jan Peerce.
Recitar mentre preso dal delirio.
Television brought the tenor with a golden voice to the masses. While he was a master of the operatic aria, he was also a favorite of countless fans who had never seen him perform in the concert hall.
La rara di bianco vestita, già l'uscio di schiudi al razzol, di già con le rose sue dita, carrezza di fiori lo
The tenor was equally at home singing the popular music his public knew and loved.
Jan was too wonderful not to be heard by everybody in this big wide world. And so we traveled. We went to all these different countries. We went to 37 different countries in our lifetime. And it was difficult because Jan ate nothing but kosher food. Our trip to Japan is an example. In those days, the food wasn't frozen, you bought dry ice. You put that in the layers of between the meat. We carried this bag, changed the dry ice in San Francisco, then in Hawaii. We stopped in Guam. By the time we got to Japan, I was almost hysterical for fear that it had spoiled. And then the representative of the Murrow newspapers came to meet us, and I said to him, "You better guard this with your life, because if anything happens to that bag, the voice won't come out of the tenor."
The trick, in my opinion, of being a technician and being an artist is if you have the knowledge to do as well, even if you're not 100%. We can't go through life being 100%.
Absolutely
so
true.
You can't, every time if you have a little discomfort or something, you can say, "I'm not playing tonight." That used to be done in the old days.
Not anymore.
Some people made careers that way.
That's right. They were available for a limited number of cancellations.
Yes. Yes. And then you say, "What about the audience?" You say, "Let them wait. Let them come around." Today you don't do that. Study, work, develop, learn, and never give up. Never give up.
To Jan Peerce, Israel, the land of his ancient ancestors, had a special meaning. In the 36 times he returned to Israel, he never ceased to be reminded of the fragile truths of religious freedom upon which this land was founded. In the biblical town of Beersheba, Jan Peerce performs Lenski's aria from Eugene Onegin by Tchaikovsky, music that brings him back to the land where his parents struggled for their dignity and religious freedom, Russia.
Что день грядущий мне готовит, войны взял напрасно водит, глубоко тьме таится он. Нет нужды прав судьбы закон. Подул я стрелой пронзённой, и мимо пролетит луна. Всё благо дня и сна приходит час определённый, благословенный день забот, благословен и тьмы приход. Блеснёт за утро ночь делится, и заиграет яркий день, а я, быть может, я гробницей стою в таинственную сеть. И память юного поэта поглотит медленная лето. Забудет мир меня, но ты и Ольга. Скажи, придешь ли, дева красоты, слезу пролить надрадно юрно и думать, он меня любил. Он меня единой поезд бьетил, рассвет печальный, жизнь бурной. Ах, Ольга, я тебя любил, тебя единой поезд бьетил, рассвет печальный, жизнь бурной. Ах, Ольга, я тебя любил. Сердечный друг, желанный друг, приди, приди, желанный друг, приди, а твой супруг, приди, а твой супруг, приди, приди. Я жду тебя, желанный друг. Приди, приди, я твой супруг. Куда вы удалились, золотые дни мои?
Jan's first trip to Russia in 1956 was a profound experience for him. Russia, the birthplace of his parents and their parents before them, the land of Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, the land where Yiddish, if at all remembered, was spoken in whispers and had not been heard publicly for nearly 40 years, and the land where Jan Peerce could not help but express his belief in religious freedom.
I had occasion of doing as one of the encores the Hebrew Yiddish spiritual, Ad Tentorium mit Gott, a plea to God. And after I had finished this number, there was a hush, a momentary hush, which I can only define as one that the audience was just excited at hearing something that they haven't heard in a long time. But moments later, there was a great outburst of applause and stamping of feet and yelling. And this happened wherever I sang, all through Russia.
Italiener versuchen als der König, dieser König. Und nie, ich lebe jetzt, wenn Sture, die war die Città.
Jan Peerce sang 3 more concerts in Moscow, as well as one in Leningrad and one in Kiev. But the highlight of the trip was a Sabbath prayer in the great synagogue of Moscow with Jan Peerce as cantor before hundreds of his people, with thousands more crowding the streets outside. For those who could not worship in the way they wished, their burden was lifted, if only for a moment. The Jewish community of Moscow and Jan Peerce shared a spiritual reunion together. The following editorial from the New York Herald Tribune of May 14, 1963, after Jan's second visit to Russia, was read into the Congressional Record. These questions of religious freedom have weighed for decades on the hearts of Russian Jews, but none dared to voice his complaints to the Lord in public for fear of punishment by the lords of the Kremlin. It was the son of a Jewish immigrant from Russia who was able to do it for them. Jacob Pinchas Perlmutt, better known as Jan Peerce. And the reason he could raise these questions without fear of reprisal by the Kremlin is that his father left Russia so that he might be born on Orchard Street.
Alice, of all the songs you've heard Jan sing over the years, have you any particular favorite?
I must say it would be very difficult for me to tell you which arias and which of the concert music I prefer, but a special number, like Bluebird of Happiness, holds a warm spot in my heart, and that this afforded us the excuse to make a collection of birds from all over the world, which we have in this cabinet here. We have bluebirds from Copenhagen, from England, from Italy, from Canada, and of course from the United States.
The Bluebird of Happiness was Jan Peerce's best-selling record. Written especially for him by Shandor Harmati and Tin Pan Alley lyricist Eddie Hyman, it became America's #1 song on the charts in 1945. Its optimistic theme was one every American could appreciate. In many ways, it reflected Jan's own rags-to-riches story.
You know what they called me in those days? They'd announce me saying, and now we'll hear from Gypsy Jan from Spokane. That was my cue to start singing Bluebird.
So learn your lesson before it is too late. So be like I, hold your head up high till you find the bluebird of happiness. You will find greater peace of mind knowing there's a bluebird of happiness. And when he sings to you, though you're deep in blue, you will see a ray of light creep through. And so remember this, life is no abyss. Somewhere there's a bluebird of happiness.
The critic Louis Biancoli best defined the spiritual qualities of Jan Peerce. When he sang Yiddish and Hebrew, he was the epitome of all the protest and pain that over the centuries have made the Jew the most tragic and noble of victims and scapegoats. Peerce also sang Bach with an intensity and fervor that argued the Protestant way to divinity. Again, he was identifying holy in mind and spirit, probing that universal kinship that reaches beyond ritual to a beauty and singleness of ideal. When he sang something like the Manzoni Requiem of Verdi, one would swear this to be the soaring voice and aspiration of a confirmed Catholic piety. And so it was, for Jan Peerce expressed the spiritual hunger of all creeds. In his book, there was but one creed, one tabernacle, in which we behold one another and God with one love.
And if things don't look so cheerful, just show a little fight. For every bit of darkness, there's a little bit of light. For every bit of hatred, there's a little bit of love. For every cloudy morning, there's a midnight moon above. So don't you...
In May of 1982, less than 4 months after this Carnegie Hall concert, Jan Peerce had a stroke that partially paralyzed the right side of his body. His voice, however, remained strong, and he vocalized every day. But in early 1983, he contracted pneumonia and fell into a coma from which he never emerged. Jan Peerce died on December 15th, 1984, at the age of 80.
And so remember this, life is no abyss, somewhere there's a Bluebird on happiness. And it won't make one bit of difference if I answer right or wrong. When you're rich, they think you're of their door. If I were rich, I'd have the time that I lack to sit in the synagogue and pray, and maybe have a seat by the eastern wall. And I discuss the holy books with the learned men 7 hours every day. This would be the sweetest thing of all. Oh, if I were a rich man, all day long, a hippity-bitty-bum. If I were a wealthy man, I wouldn't have to work long. Lord, who made the lion and the lamb, you decreed I should be what I am. Would it spoil some vast eternal plan if I were a wealthy man?